quiet night in a sleepy suburban neighborhood, the kind where the biggest drama is usually a late garbage pickup or a kid's bike left on the sidewalk. That was my life, or at least what I hoped it would be, when I rolled into Willow Creek Estates with my beat-up Jeep and a dream of finally planting some roots. I'd spent years overseas, dodging bullets and rebuilding engines in the dust, and all I wanted was a slice of peace. A backyard for my dog, a garage for my motorcycles, and maybe a cold beer on the porch without someone barking orders at me. For a few golden weeks, I had it. Kids laughed in the cul-de-sac, neighbors waved like they meant it, and the air smelled like charcoal and freedom. Then she showed up. Linda Farthington, the HOA president locals called Karen Supreme, didn't just ruin my peace. She turned my Jeep into the spark that lit a wildfire, burning her little empire to the ground. This is the story of how one woman's petty power trip crashed into a federal operation, and how a neighborhood took its soul back, one tow truck at a time. I was settling into Willow Creek Estates, thinking I'd finally found my soft landing after years of chaos. My Jeep, this rugged black beast with military-grade plating and a reinforced bumper, was parked out front, exactly where I'd left it after locking it up tight. It wasn't just a car to me, it was a piece of my past, a reminder of the grit I'd carried through deserts and war zones. Plus, it had a new gig. The local police task force had rigged it with cameras, GPS trackers, and some fancy digital recording unit. They'd tapped me to help with a sting operation, something about a drug ring creeping into our pristine little community. Just keep it parked there, they'd said. Rotate it every few days. Don't move it without telling us, and slap a big lock on it so no one messes with it. Easy enough, right? I figured it was my way of giving back without getting too tangled up in things. Enter Linda Farthington. I'd heard whispers about her before I even unpacked my last box. Neighbors called her Karen Supreme behind her back, and it didn't take long to see why. She strutted around like she owned every blade of grass in Willow Creek, clipboard always in hand, ready to slap a fine on anyone who dared to breathe wrong. The first time she laid eyes on my Jeep, I was tinkering in the garage, and she marched right up, her lips pursed so tight they looked like they'd been vacuum sealed. "That thing," she said, pointing at it like it was a dead raccoon on her lawn, "doesn't belong here. It looks like it rolled out of a junkyard or some war movie. This is a respectable neighborhood." I wiped the grease off my hands and tried to play nice. "It's not just a car, Linda. It's part of my consulting work with law enforcement." She scoffed, loud and dramatic, like I'd just told her I was the king of Florida. "Oh, please, soldier boy. Save the tall tales and get a Honda like a normal person." From then on, it was war. Not the kind with bullets, but the kind where you wake up to passive-aggressive notes taped to your door every other day. Unauthorized vehicle modifications, one said. Excessive tactical aesthetics, read another. My favorite? Parking intimidation. I mean, come on. Who knew a Jeep could bully someone just by sitting there? I'd laugh about it with my neighbor Rick over a beer. He lived 2 doors down and basically turned his porch into a surveillance hub with his Ring camera rolling 24/7. "She's unhinged, man," he'd say, shaking his head. "Last week she fined me, 'cause my dog's bark was too loud. That woman's got a vendetta against anything that doesn't scream beige and boring." What Linda didn't know, because she was too busy memorizing HOA bylaws like they were the Bible, was that my Jeep wasn't just some eyesore. It was a spy truck, blending in perfectly because of its rough look, keeping tabs on the drug ring without raising suspicion. The task force loved it. "It's ideal," Officer Melendez told me one night when he stopped by to check the setup. "No one's going to think twice about a beat-up Jeep in a driveway." I nodded, proud to be part of something bigger, and added that heavy-duty wheel lock they'd asked for. It screamed, "Don't touch me," which I thought would keep Linda at bay. Boy, was I wrong. It all went down one afternoon when I ran to the hardware store for some bolts. I came back, and my Jeep was gone. Poof! Vanished. In its place, a bright orange parking cone with a sticky note slapped on it. I ripped it off and read it. Code violation. HOA confiscated. I stood there, jaw on the ground, trying to process the absurdity. Linda had cut the lock off a law enforcement vehicle and towed it like it was some rusty old couch someone dumped on the curb. Rick jogged over, still in his flip-flops, waving his phone. "Dude, I got it all on camera." She waltzed up with bolt cutters, smirking like she just won the lottery, and said, "One less eyesore to worry about." Then this sketchy tow truck hauled it away. I'm telling you, she's lost it. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. My stomach churned as the reality hit. She'd just torched a federal operation. I knocked on her door, but she wouldn't answer. Just sent me a smug email about relocating a non-compliant vehicle to ensure community standards. I called the task force, voice shaking. "You're not going to believe this, but my Jeep's gone. The HOA president took it." 30 minutes later, they were on my porch, and Officer Melendez looked like he'd aged a decade. "She cut the lock?" he asked, voice tight. I nodded. "And towed it. No warning, no nothing." He ran a hand over his face. "That's federal surveillance gear. We're talking obstruction at minimum. Where'd she take it?" That's when the night turned into a circus. At 3:17 a.m., I jolted awake to sirens, screeching tires, and blue and red lights flashing off my walls. I stumbled to the window, heart hammering, and saw armed officers swarming the street, barking into radios. They weren't there for the drug ring. They were there for my Jeep. I threw on a hoodie and met them outside. "Where's the vehicle?" one demanded. I swallowed hard. "You're not gonna like this. Linda Farthington, the HOA lady, stole it." Their faces went from confused to furious in about 2 seconds flat. Melendez pulled me aside. "We need that Jeep back now. The operation's blown. Suspects are spooked, and we've got nothing without that gear." The next morning, Melendez texted me. "We found it. You're going to want to see this." He picked me up in an unmarked SUV, jaw clenched, and drove me to a rusted gate behind an HOA maintenance shed I'd never noticed. The padlock hung open like a taunt. Inside was a weed-choked lot, cones, tarps, and 3 other cars with peeled-off stickers. And there was my Jeep, scratched up, dirty, dumped like trash. The surveillance case was gutted, wires spilling out. I just stared, gut-twisting, while Melendez kicked a cone. "This isn't a tow lot. It's her private graveyard. She's been running an impound racket out of a shed." Then, like some twisted movie scene, Linda clip-clopped up in heels, all smiles. "Oh, good, you found it. I was about to notify you. The HOA's within its rights." Melendez cut her off, voice like steel. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." She blinked, confused. "Excuse me? I'm the HOA president. I can remove unregistered—" He didn't let her finish. "You remove federal property from an active operation. Do you get how serious that is?" Her smugness flickered. "That thing was a nuisance. I thought it was abandoned. It had a lock, sat there for days. I did you a favor." I couldn't hold it in. "A favor? You wrecked months of work and laughed about it." She kept talking as they escorted her away, insisting she'd save the neighborhood. Melendez turned to me. "Got any footage?" I showed him Rick's ring video, Linda slicing the lock, grinning at the camera, the tow truck dragging my Jeep off. "That's gold," he said, calling in backup. By day's end, they had her on video, an illegal tow yard, and a blown sting. But Linda? She wasn't done digging her hole. Things were already spiraling, but Linda Farthington wasn't the type to slink away quietly. Oh no, she doubled down like a gambler, betting the house on a busted flush. A couple days after they hauled her off for questioning, word got around that she'd called an emergency HOA meeting. Not to apologize, mind you, but to clarify her side of the story. I got a notice taped to my door, written in her signature passive-aggressive cursive, addressing recent misunderstandings regarding community safety and federal overreach. Federal overreach? I nearly choked on my coffee. This woman had towed a spy truck and was acting like she was the victim. Friday night rolled around, and the community center was packed tighter than a sardine can. Neighbors I hadn't even met showed up, some with folding chairs like they were tailgating a drama fest. Rick was there, of course, grinning ear to ear with a soda in hand. "This is gonna be fireworks," he whispered as we grabbed spots near the front. There were reporters too, snapping pics, and a few serious-looking folks in dark suits who didn't touch the free cookies on the table. The air buzzed with tension, like everyone knew a storm was coming. Linda strutted in 15 minutes late, rocking a bright red blazer like she was about to host a game show, not face a firing squad. She clutched her clipboard, flashed a smug little smile, and tapped the mic twice. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I want to address the recent incident involving the removal of an illegally parked unregistered vehicle from our street. There's been a lot of confusion, misinformation, and frankly hysteria about this." Rick snorted so loud I had to elbow him to shut up. She pressed on, undeterred. "As your HOA president, I take our safety and aesthetic standards seriously. When I saw an unsightly, clearly abandoned Jeep chained up for days, I followed procedure to have it removed. I had no idea about any covert operations, nor was I told it belonged to a government agency. Honestly, I think I was misled." That's when I'd had enough. I shot to my feet, voice booming louder than I meant it to. "Misled? You cut the lock off a federal vehicle, towed it without a shred of permission, and bragged about it. How's that misled?" The room erupted in murmurs. Linda glared at me, her eyes narrowing like she could will me to vanish. But I wasn't sitting down. I marched to the front, pulled a USB drive from my pocket, and handed it to the IT guy hovering by the projector. He nodded. He'd been waiting for this. The screen flickered, and up came Rick's ring footage. Linda slicing the lock with bolt cutters, smirking at the camera, gesturing to the tow truck as it hauled my Jeep away. Then the Facebook posts rolled. Her gloating about taking action, mocking my military cosplay. And that gem. Sometimes you have to break the rules to keep the streets clean. The room went dead silent. Greg, this mousy HOA board guy who always looked like Linda had him on a leash, cleared his throat and whispered to the woman next to him. Linda's face twisted, her voice getting shrill. "Okay, so maybe I didn't know who owned it, but it violated HOA standards, and the bylaws give me authority." That's when a calm voice cut through from the side. "No, they don't." Everyone turned. It was Detective Sasha Lynn, stepping forward with a thick folder in hand, cool as ice. "We've reviewed your HOA charter, the removal procedures, and the paperwork, or lack of it. You bypassed the board, didn't notify any agency, used an unlicensed tow company, and stashed the Jeep in an illegal lot. You've been acting without consent." Linda opened her mouth, but Sasha kept going, razor sharp. "Worse, that vehicle was part of a joint task force operation. You compromised months of surveillance, damaged equipment, and forced us to scrap the case." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda's smugness cracked, and she looked to the board for backup, but they were shrinking away like they'd just noticed she was radioactive. Greg stood up, shaky but determined. "I'd like to motion we suspend Linda Farthington from her position as HOA president, pending investigation and legal review." Another board member piped up. "Seconded." A third mumbled, "All in favor?" And a chorus of "Aye" rang out, unanimous and loud. Linda's jaw dropped. "You can't do this," she screeched, her voice hitting a pitch that could have shattered glass. "This is a power grab. I built this HOA. I've served this community for 6 years." I stepped closer, arms crossed. "And you destroyed it in one afternoon." She flipped through her clipboard like she could magic up an escape, then pulled out a letter and waved it like a flag. "This is a cease and desist from my attorney against the police and Mr. Jacobs for entrapment, defamation, and emotional distress. You'll all hear from my legal team soon." Sasha took the letter, glanced at it, and handed it back with a smirk. "Trent Maxwell? We know him. He's under investigation for misconduct in 3 other HOA cases. Good luck." The room turned on her then. Even her usual yes men sat silent. Rick leaned over, whispering, "Ding dong, the witch is cooked." Linda stormed out, barking over her shoulder, "You haven't heard the last of this." But as she left, something shifted. Someone clapped, then another, Soon the whole place was cheering, a wild, unplanned ovation for the fall of a suburban dictator. Sasha leaned in close. "We're sending this to the DA. Charges are coming. Maybe not all federal, but she's not walking away clean." I nodded, still reeling. It was happening. Linda's reign was crumbling, and we'd lit the match. But she wasn't done yet. A few days later, she popped up outside the courthouse in a wrinkled suit, holding a press conference nobody wanted. Her new lawyer, Trent Maxwell, this sleazy guy with slick-back hair and sunglasses that screamed, "I sue for fun," stood beside her smirking like he'd already won. "Linda Farthington is the real victim here," he drawled. "The police didn't label that Jeep as official property, Mr. Jacobs, baited her into this, and the HOA bylaws grant her immunity." I watched it on the news, jaw on the floor, as the anchor actually laughed mid-sentence. The DA hit back fast. Charges filed for unauthorized towing, destruction of property, obstruction, and tampering. The feds sent a letter to the HOA demanding cooperation, and the board caved, issuing an apology and promising reforms. Linda countersued everyone. Me, the police, the HOA, even the city, claiming I'd lured her into breaking the law by parking my Jeep legally on my own property. The judge tossed it out so quick the clerk smirked. Meanwhile, the neighborhood started healing. People waved again. Kids played without looking over their shoulders. And Rick? He launched a website with all the dirt. Videos, screenshots, even a Team Jeep mug for sale. The Jeep came back to me, scratches and all, and the task force upgraded it with new gear as a thank you. I laughed when they handed me the keys. Linda hated the old one. "Wait till she sees this." Then the final bomb dropped. An HOA insurance audit found Linda had been skimming funds for years. Towing fees, contractors, even printer ink. All buried in shady expense reports. Thousands of dollars gone. Greg brought me the report one night, looking exhausted but free. "She's done," he said. "The state's coming next week. Might dissolve the HOA unless we rebuild it from scratch." I asked what he thought would happen if it was gone for good. He shrugged. "Maybe we just be neighbors again." Simple, but it hit me hard. One woman's control freak streak had twisted everything, and one dumb move, cutting that lock, unraveled it all. The neighborhood was buzzing, finally shaking off Linda Farthington's chokehold, but I knew she wouldn't go down without one last swing. That woman had the stubbornness of a mule and the ego of a reality TV star. Sure enough, about a week after her courthouse stunt, the air got thick again, like that eerie calm before a tornado rips through. I was on my porch, sipping coffee and scrolling through the latest batch of Linda memes. Someone had turned her bolt cutter moment into a rap remix, pure gold, when I saw it. A convoy rolling down the street. 3 black SUVs, a sedan, and a pair of marshals stepping out, moving with that quiet, no-nonsense vibe you only see in movies. My heart skipped. This was it. They knocked on Linda's door, sharp and loud, then waited. 30 seconds ticked by. Nothing. One of them, a guy with a buzz cut and a badge glinting in the sun, called out, "Linda Farthington, this is the U.S. Marshal Service. Open the door." Still nothing. Neighbors started peeking through blinds and Rick bolted out with a lawn chair and a bag of popcorn, plopping down like he'd bought front row tickets. "Here we go," he said, grinning at me. A locksmith stepped up, popped the lock in under a minute, and the door swung open. I held my breath, half expecting her to come out swinging that clipboard like a battle axe. When she finally appeared, it wasn't the Linda I knew. No smug smile, no heels clicking like war drums. Her hair was a mess, her red blazer crumpled like she'd slept in it for days, and she clutched a manila folder like it was her last lifeline. The marshals cuffed her, hands in front, and she didn't fight, just shuffled out, head down, with this dazed look, like she couldn't believe it had come to this. "This is a mistake," she mumbled, as they led her to the car. "You'll see, it's all a misunderstanding." But nobody bought it. The second the SUV doors slammed shut, a cheer broke out. Loud, loud, like the whole block had been holding its breath for months. Rick even lit off some leftover 4th of July sparklers, cackling like a kid. "Take that, Karen Supreme." Sasha Lynn swung by later that afternoon, still in her detective mode, and sat me down on the porch. "Warrant served," she said, handing me a coffee she'd grabbed from the gas station. "Charges are stacked: obstruction, tampering with government property, running an unlicensed tow operation, misuse of HOA funds, and suspected embezzlement. It's a laundry list." I whistled low. "Sounds like a bad crime novel." She smirked, but her eyes were tired. "It's real, though. The HOA's toast, half the board quit, the rest voted to dissolve it rather than face a lawsuit from the residents. No more bylaws, no more fines." I leaned back, letting that sink in. "So, we're free?" She nodded. "Pretty much. Greg's trying to keep things together, but most folks just want to live again." The fallout hit fast. With no HOA, people went wild. In a good way. Old man Jenkins down the street painted his mailbox neon green, kids drew chalk murals on every sidewalk, and flags popped up on porches without Linda's threatening notes. It was like the neighborhood took a deep breath and remembered how to laugh. Rick, never one to miss a chance, turned his website into a full-on resource hub for HOA victims, complete with a Linda Farthington survival guide and a t-shirt with her parking note printed on it. "Code violation. HOA confiscated." He sold 50 in a day. Guy's a hustler. But the real kicker came a few days later. Officer Melendez and Sasha showed up, out of uniform, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. "Got something for you," Melendez said, tossing me a giant set of keys. I caught them confused. "What's this?" They led me around back to where that rusted maintenance shed sat. The one Linda had turned into her secret impound lot. "City auctioned it off after the investigation," Sasha explained. "Task force bought it, but we don't need it. It's yours now." I blinked, stunned. "You're kidding." Melendez clapped me on the shoulder. "Nope. Figure the guy who lost his Jeep to an HOA nut deserves to call the shots here." I walked inside and it hit me. The irony was perfect. The spot where Linda dragged my Jeep was mine now, legal and forever. I didn't waste time. I turned it into a community garage. Workbenches, a repair bay, tools donated by neighbors who'd had enough of rules. We called it the garage, and it was open to everyone. Vets fixing old rides, teens tinkering with car projects, dads patching up bikes. No permits, no fees, just people helping each other. To christen it, the task force threw a surprise, a Jeep parade. Dozens of them, military civilian vintage, rolled through Willow Creek, horns blaring, kids waving flags. My upgraded Jeep led the pack, community watchdogs stenciled on the hood. Rick live-streamed it and it blew up online. Millions of views, comments calling it the ultimate middle finger to Linda. At the end, Sasha handed me a plaque. "In appreciation for keeping your cool when your HOA went full villain," she read aloud, and the crowd roared with laughter. I hung it on the garage wall, right where everyone could see it. Linda, she took a plea deal. No jail, but she had to pay back the HOA, got fined by the state, and was banned from any association board for 20 years. She sold her house in the dead of night and disappeared. No goodbyes, no fanfare, nobody cared. Her lawyer, Trent Maxwell, stopped taking calls, probably hiding from the mess she'd dragged him into. The neighborhood kept growing after that. We threw barbecues, planted trees, and started calling ourselves Eyesore Estates as a joke. The Jeep stayed parked out front, a scratched-up badge of honor, and the residents chipped in for a metal sign, reserved for tactical eyesore. It's still there, bolted to the curb, and even the mailman snapped a pic with it. Every time I fire up that engine, I grin. It's not just a car anymore. It's a story, a symbol, a reminder that one petty tyrant's bad call brought us all together. Looking back, it's wild how it all started with a parked Jeep. Linda thought she was guarding her perfect little kingdom, but she was the real threat, choking the life out of this place with her rules and her ego. One snip of those bolt cutters, and she handed us the keys to take it back. Now, when I sit on my porch and watch the kids ride by, giving me thumbs ups, I think, this is what peace feels like. Not silence, but freedom. And Linda? She's just a ghost story we tell over beers. A cautionary tale with a hell of a punchline.